One of the most difficult things about the upcoming school year is that we already know it's going to bring some unprecedented challenges. But if it's anything like the previous 2 years, exactly what those unprecedented challenges will be is anybody's guess. Even still, while we may not know what challenges lie on the horizon, there are things that we can do to prepare our students and ourselves for whatever is coming our way. One of the most important is to think about our feedback, as feedback is one of the main lines of communication between teacher and student, and also one of the biggest drains on teacher time. That's why this week I'm going to be talking about ways to upgrade feedback this year, with part 1 examining one of my new favorite topics, feedback literacy. To understand feedback literacy, there's a quote that I love from John Hattie and Shirley Clark's Visible Learning Feedback, where they say that students are taught to receive, interpret, and use the feedback provided is probably much more important than focusing on how much feedback is provided by the teacher, as feedback given but not heard is of little use. What they're talking about here is that feedback needs to be read and dug into to be effective. Now this seems like common sense, but unread or lightly read feedback is actually the norm. And while it has long been debated whether a tree falling in a lonely forest with no one around creates a sound, I can guarantee that feedback falling unread into a lonely backpack or Google Drive account will have no impact at all. That is why feedback literacy is so important. If we want our feedback, the feedback that we put many hours into, to be meaningful, we need to make sure students understand how to receive, interpret, or use it. Or, put another way, we need to ensure that our students are feedback literate. To help students become feedback literate, researcher Paul Sutton, who coined the term feedback literacy, breaks it into 3 categories. Number 1, students need to understand who they are academically. Number 2, students need to understand what feedback is. And number 3, students need to understand how to use feedback. So let's dig into this. Part 1 is that students need to have a strong understanding of who they are academically. In Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain, Zaretta Hammond says, "There exist decades of research findings that tell us students with positive academic mindsets are more willing to engage, work harder, and persevere during challenging assignments that stretch them. That students have a strong sense of who they are academically, can better engage and persevere is why student understanding of self is the foundation of feedback literacy. Because feedback is going to both challenge students and be challenging to incorporate. And if we want students to be in a position to really hear what we're saying and to do the hard work to incorporate it, then they need to be standing on level ground first. Now, discussing how to get students on that level ground is a longer topic than I have time for here, but in the show notes is a link to a piece that I wrote on that exact topic a few weeks ago. The second part of feedback literacy is we need to improve student understanding of what feedback is. To understand why that's so important, there's a study recounted in Paul Tufts' Helping Children Succeed from Massachusetts Middle School, where students received feedback on an essay. And at the top of the essay, when it was returned, was one of 2 post-it notes. The first group, the control group, got a post-it note with a neutral statement, something along the lines of, "I'm giving you these comments so you'll have feedback on your paper." The second group got a note that had a quick burst of direction and affirmation. It said, "I'm giving you these comments because I have high expectations, and I know you can reach them." Beyond the post-it notes, the feedback was exactly the same, but the results were anything but similar. The group that got the short note of affirmation and direction, the result of just a few seconds of scrawling a boilerplate note on a paper, did double the revisions of the control. Getting a 208% increase in revisions from one short note seems ludicrous, but what happened was that the note taught students what the feedback is. Those students who thought feedback was meant to criticize or to point out their flaws suddenly understood that it was meant to help, and that changed everything about how they responded to it. That is the power of feedback literacy and teaching students what feedback is. Now, I do this with my students in a couple ways before they ever get a piece of feedback from me. The first is that we discuss the value of feedback. I point out how much time investment it takes on the teacher's part to give feedback, and then we as a class discuss why a teacher would put in that time, what the payoff is. The second is that I give some feedback ground rules. The first, is, which underscores the value of feedback, is they always will get time to incorporate feedback during class. The second is that they are allowed to always question or inquire or push back against feedback. And the third is that they're expected to use the feedback. Now, that doesn't mean that they have to blindly follow it. I don't want that. Instead, I want them to engage with it in the pursuit of improving. The last part of feedback literacy is how to use feedback. In his paper, Paul Sutton says, "We cannot assume that learners possess the skills to use feedback, and explicit guidance concerning how to feed forward feedback may need to be given." So often as teachers, we assume that our directions are as clear to students as they are to us. But a raft of research exists that shows that this is not the case. I once read a study that found that 51% of students in a university class misunderstood what the teacher meant by the word analysis, which was probably a word the instructor didn't think twice about using. When it comes to avoiding these points of confusion and making sure students know how to use our feedback, nothing is more effective than conferencing over the feedback. That's why whenever I give a big piece of feedback, I always follow it with a conference where students prepare answers to 3 questions in advance. Question number 1 is, how do you feel about the feedback? What is your reaction to it? Number 2 is, what do you not understand? What do you not agree with? What do you push back against? And number 3 is, what do you still need? The students answer these in advance on a Google form, and then we use their responses to co-construct a path forward, one that is clear to both of us, and one that helps the feedback that we spend so much time on, both the students and the teachers, to be as effective as possible. The other thing I do when it comes to how to use feedback is to model using feedback myself. My next video will be on the importance of two-way feedback, or having feedback flow back and forth between student and teacher instead of just downhill from the teacher. But when students give me feedback, I try to model hearing and accepting and incorporating it. I will say, oh, I got this feedback over here, and here is what I'm doing with it. So to wrap it all up, feedback is a deeply powerful tool when it comes to building student and teacher relationships, building student academic identities, and building student knowledge, but only if it's received and used. That's why we need to focus on building students up, making clear what feedback is, and helping students craft a plan for using it. Or, in other words, helping students to become feedback literate. I hope that you enjoy what is my first video, and please subscribe both here and at my blog, at my blog in the link below if you'd like more of this. Thanks for watching, and to those teachers who started school already, I hope it's going well, and to those who are just about to begin, good luck.